Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode on Financial Madness. My name is Kozan and I'm here to help you be better with your money. In this episode we're going to be learning about ISA accounts. We're going to learn what it is, what the common ISA accounts are, and whether you should have one or not. So the fundamentals of an ISA isn't really that hard to understand. It stands for an individual savings account. It's essentially a savings account where you pay no tax on. As of this current tax year, an individual can deposit up to £20,000 in an ISA account and pay no tax on it whatsoever. So some of you may be thinking,
wait, do we even pay taxes on savings?
And most of you probably don't. But in actual fact, potentially you could be. So each person in the UK is actually given something called a Personal Savings Allowance, or PSA for short. Depending on your income bracket, you are allowed up to a certain amount of pounds in interest before you are taxed. So for basic income earners, so that's anyone earning from £12,500 to £50,000, you're allowed £1,000 interest tax-free. Anyone who's a higher rate income earner, so that's anyone that's earning £50,000 to £150,000, right? Yes. Can only get £500 of interest tax-free. So anyone that's in the additional rate income bracket, so that's anyone earning £150,000 a year plus, you have a £0 allowance. So that means any interest you earn on any of your accounts is eligible for tax. Another tax allowance that every individual in the UK has is called a Capital Gains Allowance. A Capital Gains Allowance allows anyone in the UK an allowance of £12,300 to be profited from any asset sold. So capital gains tax is implemented if an individual sells an asset that is worth £6,000 or more. The tax is on the profit that you make, or the capital gained, and that is 10% of your profit for a basic tax rate holder, or 20% for higher rate or additional rate earners. The allowance given for each individual is £12,300. So once you go over that profit allowance, or capital gains allowance, that's when the tax will be implemented per year. When I'm talking about assets here, I mean things like selling a house, selling a car, stocks and shares, or earning dividends. By the way, I should mention that any tax allowances or income brackets that I mentioned throughout this video, it is subject to change. The numbers that I've stated are only valid for the 2020-21 tax year, which is this current tax year. But if you are watching this in the future, please do check out the government website for the updated numbers. So I really wanted you all to understand the tax allowances we are given every year, because it really drives home why there is an ISA account and the possible benefits for you as a saver or an investor. So as I mentioned before, an ISA account is simply just a savings account, but there is an added benefit. The benefit is that any money that you put into an ISA account is not taxable. It's separate to the PSA allowance and it's separate to the capital gains tax allowance. Simply put, any money you put in is not taxable. But there is a limit. You can only put £20,000 per year into an ISA account. That doesn't mean an ISA account can only have £20,000. An ISA account is only limited to have £20,000 put in every year. So in year one, I can put £20,000. Year two, I can put another £20,000. By the end of year two, I'll have £40,000 in my ISA account. So there are four types of ISA accounts that someone can open. I'm only going to mention two of the most common ones in this video, which is the cash and stocks and shares ISA. But there is also something called the Innovative Finance ISA, as well as the Lifetime ISA as well. But the other two are a bit more unique, and I think they deserve their own video just to dive in a bit more. So let's start with the cash ISA. So a cash ISA is probably ideal for anyone that has short to medium saving goals. It's very similar to the savings accounts that we all know of, like the instant access one, the fixed rate one, and the regular savers account as well. So a cash ISA, simply put, is just cash in a savings account which has that tax-free wrapper. So any interest earned in that cash ISA account is not eligible for tax and remains separate to your personal savings allowance as well. Cash ISAs are also typically free as well. So the other type of account is the stocks and shares ISA. The stocks and shares ISA is an account where you can invest your money in funds, shares, fixed income bonds, and have it protected within this £20,000 tax-free wrapper. So any gains that you get from your investments, whether that's through dividends or selling a financial item, is not subject to capital gains tax. And it's probably ideal for medium to long-term saving goals. You need to be 16 or older to open a cash ISA, or 18 and over to open a stocks and shares ISA. There is also a mini version called a junior ISA, which kind of acts as the same as both ISAs, but the allowance is only £9,000 a year, as opposed to £20,000. It's probably ideal for investing for any children, or if any kids are interested in putting some money away. I highly encourage that too. Always start young. Other important facts to know about ISA accounts is typically nowadays there's no restrictions on withdrawing your money from an ISA account. With cash, it's usually quite instant now. With the stocks and shares, you can get your money, but the way it works is they'll need to, the company holding your investment will need to sell off that investment, turn it into cash, and then they'll give you that cash. And that takes around about 7 working days. So if you are thinking about investing in a stocks and shares ISA, just be wary that there is that delay if you do need to get access to cash immediately. As I mentioned, with a ISA account, we're only given a £20,000 allowance every tax year. So it's important to note that any money that you withdraw throughout that tax year, you're not given back into your allowance. Let me demonstrate with this as an example. So say currently I've invested £15,000 in one of my ISA accounts. So that gives me £5,000 left in my allowance for the remaining of the tax year. But let's say I needed to withdraw £5,000 from my ISA account because my car broke down and I need to buy a new car. So I take that money from the £15,000 in my ISA account. So now my ISA account now holds £10,000. My allowance still stays at £5,000. Just because I've withdrawn another £5,000 doesn't mean your allowance then becomes available. So once you've used the allowance, there's no way of getting it back. You can also not roll over any allowances into the following year. So say, keeping with the same example, say I still had £5,000 left in my ISA allowance and we move on to the next year, it resets to £20,000. I don't get £25,000 with the rollover. So if you're thinking about getting an ISA account, do try and think about maxing out your ISA allowance as much as possible, because it is only available for each tax year. Another thing that you should note is that there's nothing stopping you from switching providers. For example, say if I'm with company A, but I think I can get a better deal with company B, I can close my account into company A and move it to company B. So if you are thinking of changing providers, one thing that you should never do is withdraw the money yourself. Because once you withdraw that money from company A and into company B, you're not going to gain the allowance back that I mentioned in my last point. What you should do instead is contact both companies, company A and company B, and mention to company A that you would like to close the account and where the account should go to. The important thing is that you should be letting the provider do all of the nitty-gritty work. That way you don't risk compromising your ISA allowance for that year. Another important, oh God, I haven't destroyed my mic. Another thing that's worth pointing out is you can have more than one ISA account, but you can't have more of the same type of ISA account with different companies. So company A and B, I can have a cash ISA with company A and a stocks and shares ISA with company B, but I cannot have a cash ISA with company A and a cash ISA with company B. And likewise with the stocks and shares, I can't have it in both companies, but I can have different types with different companies. So is it worth getting an ISA? Obviously there's no simple answer. So starting off with the cash ISA, the Personal Savings Allowance that I mentioned at the beginning of my video, they were recent changes that were brought in a few years ago by the government. And those recent changes have meant that for most savers, it is unlikely that you will be impacted by this savings tax. So MoneySavingExpert, which is another personal finance website, have broken it down quite nicely. I'll put a clip of the table that they created. For a basic rate taxpayer who has a 1.2 savings account, for them to pay any tax on their savings, they would need to put in £83,333 every year in their savings account. For a higher rate taxpayer, if you put in £40,000 in a year, that's when you're eligible for tax. But for the additional rate taxpayer, you don't get any allowance, so you'll be taxed immediately on any interest that you earn, which makes it a bit more beneficial for you guys and girls to get an ISA account. So if you are in the basic rate or higher rate tax rate earner and you don't have £81,000 or £40,000 to put into your savings account, so then it fundamentally becomes a decision on what rate is better for you. Obviously, the higher rate, the higher return you're going to get on your money. What I tend to find nowadays is the savings account actually gives a better return on interest than cash ISA accounts. But obviously that changes over time, so do have a think about that if you're deciding between a cash ISA or a generic savings account. So for a stocks and shares ISA, again, this goes down to your level of risk. I will be doing a full video on how to create a stocks and shares ISA because I have one myself. As I mentioned before, if you are investing your money in stocks, shares, funds or bonds, you are given a capital gains tax allowance of $12,300. So obviously, if you are earning above that, then it would make sense that you would open an ISA account. So as I mentioned in one of my previous videos with regards to compound interest, link in the above, still learning where it goes, but in that video I explain how the interest you earn grows exponentially over time. So this is where the ISA account can be really beneficial for someone that's saving for a medium to long-term goal. Because once you've put your money in there, any growth that money has is not subject to any capital gains tax whatsoever. Cool, so that's it for this week's episode. As always, if you found today's episode really helpful, please let me know in the comments down below or give this a thumbs up. I would really appreciate that. And yeah, if you want to keep up to date with my future videos, hit that subscribe button too. Cool, see you later.